Okay, welcome everyone. Welcome to another Saturday night stream. Today we're discussing Hermeticism versus Objectivism, and we'll talk about how that relates to music and even model building too. So we kind of fuse all three of them together. Talk about Ayn Rand, Kybalion text, rational egoism, and classical guitar, creative life, mentalism. We'll be talking about all of that today. So hope you join the chat, join the conversation. If you got any questions, feel free to ask them anytime. The primary sources I'll be using here for today's show will be the Kybalion, which is in public domain, the Ayn Rand Objectivist Ethics. I'll share that website. And then Ayn Rand Faith and Force, another website I'll put up on the screen for you to look at. So, hello everyone, welcome to the stream, and glad you all can make it. So, tonight is an open discussion on something I've been thinking about a lot, and I've been making videos about this the last couple of days. So this sort of this tension between Hermetic philosophy and Ayn Rand's Objectivism. If you watch my Thursday video, you know what I'm talking about. Not really, you can't really reconcile these two different philosophies. If you did, though, you'd have to water one down tremendously to make it sort of line up with the other philosophy. So it doesn't quite work out fully. There are aspects of it in a creative life that you can use, even despite the tension between Hermetic philosophy and Ayn Rand's Objectivism. There's that tension there, but it's useful for creative life, and that's what we're going to be talking about today. And we'll listen to examples. And so actually, let's listen to some examples now. Let me get this off the screen. Oops, I don't want to do that. I want to pause that, and then we'll get to how about a Bach lute suite? Let's see, which one can we pick here? They got a bunch of them here, so let's listen to the first one. Hope it's not too loud. What kind of? Okay. We're gonna probably. I guess we could listen to the first one. Let me get that set up over here. And this is David Russell performance. And we'll listen to the first prelude. Or it doesn't matter. He plays all of them. He plays all of them. Let's see. So before we get to play that, let's play a little bit here. I'll make sure the volume is up a little bit so we can hear it. Get that set up. Hope that's not too loud. Okay. Yeah, that's really fast. That's really, really fast. Yeah, but so this is kind of the opening phrase of the prelude. And to kind of listen closely to how it's focused in terms of the Hermetic, the Kybalion, the first principle, mentalism. And don't forget to drop your questions in the chat as we go along here. I'll be paying attention from time to time. I'll be looking in. Let's listen to a little bit more. Yeah, those are nice ornaments too. Yeah, it's really focused playing and very intense. So that's David Russell playing the first prelude of the Bach lute suite. Okay, so let's go over here to the Kybalion text, and I have it. There it is. So here's all the different chapters, and this is not the same version that I have. So this particular Hermes Trismegistus, the great master of masters, introduction, Hermetic philosophy. So Hermeticism, and you can follow along on this page here. Right there, that page, the Kybalion wiki source, up there on the screen. It should be in the description box below, so go check that out. So Hermeticism, especially the Kybalion, starts with mentalism. That's the first one they start with, and mental transformation. That's it right there. The mental universe. So the all is mind. So you can read the full text here. It's public domain, the Kybalion on Wikisource, like I said, or that you can do the Internet Archive. I have that available. There's that, and that's the one that I have. Let's see. So I can go ahead and scroll down. I can flip through pages here. This one actually has the right order of principles. Let me go back. There. Okay. So the first one, the principle of mentalism. So this is it goes through the introduction, it goes through the Hermetic philosophy, and then it goes through each of the principles. So the principle of mentalism, the all is mind, the universe is mental. Sounds like some British joke or something. So you can go to thearchive.com and download this textbook. This is the book that I use. So however, though, we're talking about mentalism and the all is mind. Objectivism, objective ethics. Here's Ayn Rand's book I recommend, The Virtues of Selfishness. It's based on a lecture delivered in February 1961 at the University of Wisconsin. So this essay was first published in The Virtue of Selfishness. So if you buy this book, it includes these essays by Ayn Rand. So I recommend this. So objectivism starts from the opposite end. Existence exists independently of consciousness. So reason is the only means of knowledge. The core ethical essay here, the Objectivist Ethics, you can download that. These are not mild differences. Okay, keep that in mind. These are not mild differences. These are big differences between the Kybalion, the all is all, and objectivism, objectivist ethics. So you can go ahead and read that for yourself at your leisure. I'm not going to read the whole thing. If you want me to read the whole thing, I can. I'll be more than happy to do that, but sure, why not? We can do that. So objectivism starts from the opposite end. Existence exists. There is no difference. So now we're going to get to the hard conflicts. So first, like the major conflict would be metaphysics. Mind as the primary versus existence as the primary. So the primacy of the mind versus the primacy of existence. That's the first hard conflicts between the Kybalion, where the mind as primary versus the existence as primary here. So second then is epistemology. Hermeticism allows intuition and gnosis, right? Objectivism does not. No intuition through gnosis. Rand is very clear about this in another essay she wrote called Faith and Force, the Destroyers of the Modern World. So based again on a lecture delivered on Yale University, February 17, 1960 at Brooklyn College, on April 4th, 1960 at the Columbia University on May 5th, 1960. Okay, so philosophy, who needs it? So this second is epistemology. Hermeticism allows intuition and gnosis. Objectivist does not. And Rand here, as you can clearly see, is very clear about this in Faith and Force. And now we get to the third one, the status of the self. Back to the Kybalion text. The status of the self. So many Hermetic paths move toward like transcending the individual ego. Yeah. There's that kind of floaty thing. I did a video about the 20th century composer Schoenberg, who was inspired by a novel that was about a character transcending the individual ego and making, though they transcend like the 7 heavenly spheres. And at the end of the novel, this character is sort of floating, and the language that's used to describe this floating is very floating, and that inspired Schoenberg to write the idea of the 12-tone row. However, objectivism treats the individual rational ego as the moral unit. So as you can see here, these conflicts are structural. So if you're trying to do a reconciliation of this, you cannot. A full reconciliation isn't possible. And like I mentioned before at the preview at the outset, you'd have to water one of these things down in order to make it reconcile, but we're not going to do that. It's not possible. It isn't possible about watering at least one of these principles down. So that's the major conflict. These are the hard conflicts between metaphysics, where the primacy of the mind versus the primacy of existence. And the conflicts are structural. So you cannot reconcile this. So that said, if we treat Hermetic ideas as psychological tools, and in the case of performance, here David Russell playing. Okay, so if we treat Hermetic ideas as just psychological tools rather than metaphysical claims, some useful overlaps appear. So, like for example, focused attention. So here's focused attention. Focus on this phrase. Okay, so that's focused attention. So when it comes to practicing guitar, this practical side of mentalism, the first principle of the Kybalion, matters enormously in guitar practice. Okay, so you focus again. And those chords are pretty difficult to play, and that requires a lot of focus. And also, it requires a lot of attention to the details of the phrase, how it's broken up. So another part of this is pattern recognition, the structural unity. So Bach is a good example of this. Let's get to the Allemande. Yeah, that's the Allemande. I like the Allemande. And that is an example of pattern recognition and structural unity, which this has this in this Allemande. So the grounded reading of correspondence here, this the second principle, as above, so below, as below, so above, the Kybalion. The structure is grounded reading the correspondence here helps when not just analyzing a piece of music, as this case that we're doing now, or it helps us when composing. It's the deliberate self-creation that shows up in both traditions, the self-creation, the rational the rational egoist. So like, yeah, okay. So that is where the correspondence, as above, so below, as above. And it does this kind of focus on the structural unity and the pattern recognition, recognize the pattern. And in this case, the Allemande, the pattern is broken up over the course of the measures. It's not just like an 8-bar phrase or something strung together. It's all like the first motive of the Allemande is da-dum, da-da-da-da-da-da-dum, da-dum. There's that motive, da-dum, da-dum. That's the pattern recognition, and that's the structural unity that it has. That's interesting about the phrasing of that Allemande, how it's written. Okay, so if you want to check for like the original Hermetic formulations, again here, check the Kybalion text here, the wiki source, and the Objectivist emphasis on productiveness and pride here at Objectivist Ethics, the same thing. Okay, so there's the Objectivist Ethics essay, and go back to the Kybalion. You can either do the wiki source if you want, or you can do this text here. And this is the text I use. Okay, so you can check that out as you go along. So now we go on to a more personal position. And if you have any questions at all about this practical use of Hermeticism in practicing and guitar and creating guitar music, or any music, let me know during the course of the show, and I'll be glad to answer. Okay, so now we get to what we call the personal position, the application. See, my working position is pretty straightforward. I keep Objectivist foundation, always. I'm a radical Objectivist. Existence exists. Reason is the method. My life is my ultimate value. I'm a means to my own end. Within that, I still find a little certain, I almost said marginal utility, Hermetic formulations, useful as mental reminders when I practice or compose, okay? So again, within that structure, that framework, my life is my ultimate value, I still find certain Hermetic formulations here useful as just mental reminders when I practice compose. So the quality of attention shapes the sound. The structural unit matters, and the standards matter. None of that requires accepting a cosmic mind. Obviously, it doesn't. So listen to the Almond again. See how the phrase is broken up? Yeah, listen again. Yeah, so we'll listen to the beginning, and you'll hear that motive. Da-dum, da-dum. And you hear how the phrase is broken up over the course of measures. Here it is. That's the phrase. Da-dum, da-da-da-da-da-da, da-dum. And then watch. It was what happens. It's going to break the phrase up. Ba-da-dum. Then there's like I'm not kind of like a pause, and then it continues the phrase. That's something Bach does a lot. So all of this working within I'm a means to my own end. My life is my ultimate value. Reason is the method. Rational egoism doesn't exist. I can work within this framework, and I can find certain hermetic formulations useful as mental reminders when I practice or compose a piece of music. So the quality, how I pay attention to shapes of the sounds, and that's what we're doing here. We're listening to the Almond, and we're listening to the shapes and the sounds of that. And then we also listen for the structure of this, how this piece is structured together as a dance. So the standards matter. And like I said, at the end of the day, that doesn't require some cosmic mind. Okay, let's keep. We'll listen to another piece. Okay, so let's see. How about, let me see, let me go over here. That's the lute suite. How about the source studies? How about, let's listen to the first one. And I will, okay, I'll pause that there so you can see Soar's face while we listen to the music. We'll listen to the first study, and we'll see if we can keep this in mind, these formulations, as we go along. Listen. Okay. Here we go. Let's listen to the first one. The first of the 20 studies by Fernando Soar. Let's see. It's starting. Okay, so it has the first phrase. It's in 3/4, and it's a short phrase. And just keep in mind the form. It's very focused. The pattern recognition, you can recognize the structural unity of this piece. And that's all, like I said, grounded and when you read about the correspondence, as above, so below. Okay. So, moving on here. So okay, let's summarize what we've been talking about already. So from reconciliation between Hermeticism and radical objectivism isn't not possible. It isn't possible. It does have very limited practical borrowing under the discipline of reason. It still could be. So, yeah, you'd have to like I said, you have to really water down some of this stuff to make it reconciled. But you can find some very limited reconciliation between the two, Hermeticism and Objectivism. But Hermeticism has to do with more. I was gonna say like spiritual, but it has to do with more with that and more creative insight using the 7 principles when creating a piece of music. But Objectivism relies on the primacy of existence. So yeah, I guess you could, I mean, Venus and Mars. I'm thinking the contrast between Venus and Mars. So, okay. So before we get into some more things, I wanted to talk some more about the conflicts. Let's see if there's anything else I can add to this. Okay, let me review the first part, metaphysics. Kybalion states the universe is mental, right? Open that up. There you go. Okay, so that's what we have. The universe is mental. It's held in the mind of the all. If that is taken literally, consciousness is the fundamental reality, right? The primacy of consciousness. Rand's position is the reverse, exists independently of anyone's consciousness. You cannot hold both claims without one absorbing the other. That's a contradiction. Okay, let's review epistemology. Hermeticism leaves room for insight that goes beyond ordinary reason. However, Rand is explicit in freedom and faith and force, that faith and force are corollaries. Faith and force are corollaries. Every period of history dominated by mysticism was a period of statism, of dictatorship, of tyranny. Read that again. Faith and force are corollaries. Every period in history, if you look in history, if you recognize these patterns, you'll see that it's dominated by anything dominated by mysticism was always a period of strong statism, of dictatorship and tyranny. And James Lindy kind of talks about this whenever the forces between science and religion start to split. There's that scheme, science and religion, that kind of splits apart. And then the larger the scheme becomes, the more mysticism takes its place. And that's what you're talking about here. It will dominate by mysticism. And every time people will start clamoring like they are now for more statism, for more different kinds of socialism. Specifically, the socialism that the leftists are advocating for is Hitler's socialism. And it becomes more dictatorship and tyranny. So you can find lectures here on the screen, Faith and Force, and read more about that for more detail. So for Ayn Rand, however, any claim to knowledge that bypasses reason, goes beyond it, is invalid. This is valid. That closes the door on gnosis or mystical correspondence as legitimate methods. Okay, so now we get to the self, the rational ego. So according to many hermetic paths, aim at aligning or dissolving the individual into larger cosmic mind. Yeah. That's kind of like communism in a way. They want to make everything, like universal education for all, one universal government for all. It's just kind of the all is all. You could see how this could lead to that strong statism. And it does dissolve the individual into a larger cosmic mind. So objectivism, however, treats the individual rational ego as the moral unit. Your life is in it itself, and transcendence of the self is not virtue. Okay? Transcendence of the self is not virtue. Okay? There's no moralness to this idea of transcending yourself. Because it is the rejection of the requirements of human life. So these three conflicts are structural. A full reconciliation requires diluting one system beyond recognition. Okay, so now let's get to listen to some more music. Let's see. How about a Villalobos prelude? Yeah, a lot of people are playing those. Five preludes. Let's do that one. Okay. So we'll pause that on the screen. And then we'll go back over here to the other computer and pull out the music for that. Rachmaninoff prelude. And then we will listen to Villalobos and see if we can get that feeling of transcendence or not. Okay. So like the next part would be the what we talked about before, but I'm going to talk about a little bit more, is the limited practical overlaps. It's very limited. So having said all that we said this before, we can treat Hermeticism ideas as a psychological tools rather than just metaphysical claims. And here's where some useful overlaps appear. For example, focused attention. So Kybalion mentalism. So let's focus attention on this. Okay, so you're focusing attention on the melody and the bass. and the sort of airy, dry sound of the chords above it that are doing the rhythm, driving the rhythm. Okay, so the quality of the shapes here, the shapes are vertical chords, and this is what the quality results from. Yeah. So you see what you're focusing on. You're focusing on those two, the duality, the contrast, the bass, the very thick, sing-songy melody with the airy, dry chords on top. So the Kybalion mentalism. Okay, so objectivism, however, already insists that thinking is volitional. Right? We do this of our own voluntary agency. So when I sit, for example, with the guitar and practice, the difference between scattered attention, all over the place, shattered brain, and deliberate focus is immediately audible, that you can hear. I don't need a cosmic mind, okay? I don't need the other mind here, the mentalism of Kybalion, to observe that fact. We don't need that at all. So the next part, as where we're listening to this Villo's prelude, is pattern and structure. And that, in the correspondence, I go a little more detail. We can interpret the pattern as recognition across scales. So we do have a melody here that we can recognize. That's pretty easy pattern. It's pretty obvious. Yeah, that's pretty easy to do. And the Bach is a little harder because the melody. But see, this can be used in music. In music, this is very practical. Just a small motive can mirror the architecture of the entire piece. Now, we listened to that with the Bach. I'm not going to listen to that again. But we already heard that small little piece right there can mirror the entire piece. And the viola was too. And so, because this insight remains very, very useful, even if we drop the claim of literal planes of being. More? Okay. Let's see if we find another music example before we start to kind of wrap it up here. That's the wrong one. Source studies. I'm not going to do that one. Let's do let's do another source study. I'm going to go back and do another source study because we've done enough Bach for the last two shows. Okay. So let me get that up just a minute. Okay, there's the Bach. And we'll just choose a piece at random and apply all these principles to it. It's pretty easy stuff, actually. Okay. Okay, let me check the chat really quick. Okay, nothing going on there. Yeah, if you have any questions, though, please drop a question while we're listening to this. I'll leave Soar up there. And let's see, we got the Prelude, Allemande, and then the Courant, Sarabande, and the Bourrée. And they have the jig. I want to listen to the jig because I like the jig. Okay, so that brings us. Okay, so let's listen to this jig first. You can hear da da da, and it's the same thing. It's focusing on that little motive that makes up the entire piece. Okay, the thing about objectivism and in context of self-creation and Kybalion texts, both traditions value deliberate self-transformation. However, the Kybalion speaks of mental transmutation. Okay, mental transmutation. Rand speaks of productiveness and pride. The commitment to making yourself into the kind of person capable of achieving your own values. Okay, so the goal, the methods are different. They both involve self-transformation, but the other one, Kybalion, involves transmutation. So Rand speaks of productiveness and pride. So the goal of deliberate self-creation is shared, even if the metaphysical background is not. Okay, so that's it. That's the duality. You got the goal of self-creation, right? Objectivism agrees with that, and it's shared even with the metaphysical background is not. So you can read about that more in those texts. Okay, so before we end here, I'm going to go over my personal position in a little more detail. So let's listen to a little bit more of this jig so we get it more focused. Yeah, that's a good piece. That's a good piece for this demonstration here because it's constantly you're kind of focusing on what the motive is, the melody is, and how it determines the rest of the piece. A little more. Okay, so now how does this apply to my personal self again, my personal position? My own kind of working position is pretty straightforward. I keep focus on objectivism foundations, right? And the objectivism foundations is existence exists, reason is the method, my life is my ultimate value, right? So within all that frameworking, and I still find certain hermetic formulations useful as mental reminders. So again, when you practice, or when I practice, or when you're writing music, or I'm writing music, mentalism reminds me that the quality of my attention determines the quality of my sound. So if I'm listening very attentively for the motive, if I'm listening very attentively to the structure and the unity overall, it's going to determine the quality of my sound. Also, when I'm writing a piece of music, I think that way too. So that's what mentalism reminds me of, the quality. How well am I paying attention? And correspondence reminds me to look for structural unity, correspondence. So this whole idea of deliberate self-creation keeps me honest about whether I am actually improving or merely just repeating habits. Yeah, self-correcting. So again, none of this requires me at all to accept the universe is a divine mind. It doesn't require that. It only requires me to take my own consciousness and my own work seriously. All right. So let me check. If you have any questions or comments about this, please let me know right now. And even if you have comments later, I'll answer the comments later. So leave them in the comment section below. Okay. So anything on creativity practice and philosophical tension, or how these ideas show up in daily work, drop them in the chat. Okay. So I'll answer the best I can. So, okay, so let's wrap it up here. And so full reconciliation between Hermeticism and radical objectivism is not possible. The foundations there's too much contradiction between each other. However, limited practical borrowing under discipline of reason, the discipline, quality, however, can still be valuable for a creative life. So again, the primary sources are the Kybalion. Let me show them up on the screen again so you can check it out yourself. Are going to be this here, or this, the wiki source, or this textbook here, The Objectivist Ethics by Ayn Rand, and then the last one, Faith and Force, and Destroyers of the Modern World. So if this kind of discussion is really useful for you, consider subscribing, and I'll see you in the next video. In fact, tomorrow I'm going to be doing my building stream, my model building stream a little bit. So come and hang out with me there. If you want to continue discussion then about this, morals, ethics, Kybalion texts, any other principles that could find reconciliation between objectivism, let me know. We can talk about this tomorrow too. So keep a lookout, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and so when I schedule the stream tomorrow, you'll get notified immediately. All right. So that's about it, and we'll see you in the next video, which is hopefully tomorrow. Have a good one. Good night.